In today's video, going to be doing a bit of a discussion here on President Trump's job approval and how the impeachment inquiry has affected those numbers, not just nationally, but also taking a look at Trump's approval in key battleground states and what this means as we head towards the election in 2020. So President Trump, in terms of the beginning stages of this impeachment inquiry process, we can see that he was actually at one of his higher points in terms of the difference between disapproval and approval, where he was to the disapproval side by about 7 or 8 percentage points. But over the past few weeks, as we've been working our way through this impeachment inquiry process, we can see that those numbers have precipitously gone in the negative direction for Trump, as he's now at a net 13.5 points between his approval to his disapproval, and at one of his weaker points that we've seen him in recent months. And then not just the national picture, but taking a look at how key battleground states are looking for Trump. Those would be states that he was just barely able to win, or states that he lost but was very competitive with Clinton back in 2016. So the three key ones are Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and his net disapproval is at -11 in Wisconsin, -10 in Michigan, and -8 in Pennsylvania. And some other key battleground states potentially going towards 2020, we see Iowa, he's at -14, Minnesota, he's at -11, Ohio, -5, Virginia, -6, North Carolina, -3, Florida, -2, Arizona, -4, Nevada, -12, Colorado, -15. Even a state like Montana, where Trump did really well in back in 2016, still not great approval numbers. It's actually fascinating when we look here as we go into those western states where, of course, the very Democratic-leaning states like Oregon and Washington, not great numbers at all. But then you just go over a couple of states, and Idaho and Wyoming are two of his strongest states. But even very conservative states like Utah, Montana, Nebraska find the president having a higher overall disapproval in comparison to his approval numbers. Going over into the Northeast, New Hampshire was actually extremely close between Clinton and Trump, but we see President Trump here at -23 percentage points in New Hampshire, making it look like it's going to be a tough battle for him to try to pick up that battleground state. And we can just see across the board, not a great situation for the current president in terms of his approval numbers in those key battleground states. And also, I wanted to take a look back at Obama's numbers in terms of his approval going into his reelection. So if we take a look at the year of 2012 going into that 2012 election, and a lot of Republicans felt like the writing was on the wall for President Obama. He was going to have a really tough time being reelected. His numbers drastically dipped after pushing through the Affordable Care Act, and we saw a lot of Democrats lose their seats in the House and the Senate as a result of the Affordable Care Act going through. So that's when we saw Obama's numbers change from being net to the positive approval by actually quite a large margin to flipping around to where he was being more disapproved of. But then going into 2012, he was able to normalize those numbers a little bit, and he was right at about 50-50 in terms of his difference between approval and disapproval going into his reelection bid in 2012. And then he ended up winning that reelection bid against Republican candidate Mitt Romney, and we can see a boost back up in his approval numbers after that election took place. But then, of course, things quickly changing for President Obama, where his disapproval started to outpace his approval from that point on. And then it's a situation where, of course, Trump was able to win in 2016, right at where Obama was seeing about a similarity between his approval, disapproval. But since that point in time, once elected officials get out of office, it almost always has a positive impact on their approval numbers. And now Obama's significantly to the positive on his approval numbers compared to where he was back during the 2016 election when Hillary Clinton fell to Donald Trump. But this was more just looking at what Obama's numbers were in terms of his approval, disapproval going in to 2012, where especially a lot of Republican pundits and talking heads were saying that Obama was going to have a really tough time winning his reelection, and that was at a 50-50 between his approval, disapproval. And then, of course, we know in 2012, Obama won by another very significant margin, not quite as significant as his prior election in 2008, but within that ballpark, and much stronger than what obviously we saw from Trump back in 2016. But then to just contrast those numbers over to what we're seeing from Donald Trump, where his numbers are getting worse during this impeachment inquiry process, where he's at one of his weakest points that he's been in recent months and just over this past year, where his disapproval is outpacing his approval by about 13 or 14 percentage points. We'll see how this changes as we continue to work our way through this impeachment process. Now, there's actually still a small minority of people on the left that feel like going through impeachment is just going to make it tougher to defeat Trump in the 2020 election. But based on the numbers that we're seeing, it's definitely having a positive impact on that potential front, given his disapproval numbers going up and his approval numbers going down. So I feel like those misgivings are misplaced for these people on the left. And also, just to talk about this on a broader scale, if this was a Democratic president who was soliciting investigations into his political rivals, and then on top of that, having that investigation be in exchange for military aid against a rival like the Russians, that Democratic president would already be out of office, in my opinion, at this point. But the Republican Party, very loyal to President Trump, and almost all of them are sticking by him at this point on in the process. And we'll see where it goes from here. But that is the difference that you can get in a Republican president as opposed to a Democratic president, where if they go to this point in time, there's a lot of Republicans that will still stand behind their president, where I just don't think that would be the case if a Democrat was in office and did something similar to what Trump has done with the Ukrainians. But that's just my opinion on the matter. These are the numbers that I wanted to touch on, though, guys, taking a look at how the approval and disapproval numbers have been shifting around since this impeachment inquiry has started. And it feels like it has been going in a negative direction for Trump over these past few weeks. So I appreciate you guys stopping by. Consider subscribing to my YouTube channel and hope to see you guys back here for my next video.